You sit there watching conversations happen around you, smiling when people expect you to smile, answering when someone asks how you are, but inside there is a question you have stopped asking out loud because no one ever seems to understand it. Why does it feel like people slowly disappear from your life without any dramatic ending? Why do friendships become distant even when you never meant to let them fade? Why do rooms that once felt familiar suddenly feel uncomfortable, as if you are standing in a place where everyone else received instructions that somehow never reached you? You have replayed countless moments in your mind, wondering whether you said something wrong, whether you loved people poorly, whether you somehow became difficult to understand. Sometimes you blame yourself. Other times you simply become tired of trying. You stop explaining how lonely you feel because every explanation seems too small for what is happening inside you. There are nights when you whisper a quiet prayer before falling asleep, not asking for fame, success, or recognition, but simply asking God to help you understand why your heart feels increasingly separated from people you once thought would always remain close. If you have ever lived through a season like this, where distance arrived without warning and silence replaced relationships you treasured, leave a comment saying, "I understand." Sometimes knowing someone else has walked a similar road reminds us that we are not carrying every burden completely alone. Perhaps what hurts the most is not being alone. It is becoming alone without choosing it. You remember making the effort. You remember reaching out first. You remember checking on people who slowly stopped checking on you. You remember trying to hold conversations together while feeling as though every word required more effort than the last. Little by little, you began noticing that you were always the one trying to keep something alive, that everyone else seemed comfortable allowing to fade away. That realization can leave a person questioning their value. It can make ordinary mornings feel unusually heavy. It can convince someone that they are simply too different to belong anywhere. Many people who trust in God have described seasons that felt remarkably similar, not because every experience has the same explanation, but because faith often grows most deeply during times when certainty feels absent. Throughout Scripture, we repeatedly encounter people who experienced waiting, misunderstanding, or unexpected isolation before they could clearly see what God was doing in their lives. Their stories do not guarantee that every lonely season has the same purpose, but they do remind us that God has often worked patiently through seasons people would have preferred to avoid. That thought may feel difficult to accept while you are still living inside the questions. Right now, you may not feel prepared for some grand spiritual lesson. You simply miss people. You miss laughing without pretending everything is fine. You miss having someone who understands the language of your heart before you even explain it. Those longings are deeply human. Faith does not require pretending they do not exist. Even faithful people throughout the Bible expressed grief, confusion, and longing before they found renewed hope. Sometimes we imagine that spiritual growth should always feel inspiring. We picture confidence, clarity, and constant peace. Yet many believers discover that growth often begins with uncomfortable changes they never requested. Certain conversations become less satisfying. Old habits no longer feel right. Environments that once seemed exciting gradually lose their appeal. This does not necessarily mean everyone around you is wrong or that you are somehow better than anyone else. It may simply mean you are changing in ways that make old patterns no longer fit as naturally as they once did. That transition can be painful because change often happens quietly. There is rarely a single dramatic moment. Instead, one invitation is missed. One friendship becomes less frequent. One conversation feels strangely empty. One familiar place suddenly feels unfamiliar. Before long, you look around and wonder how your life became so different without your permission. During those moments, it becomes tempting to measure your worth by the number of people still standing beside you. Social media reinforces that temptation. The world constantly suggests that being surrounded by people proves you are succeeding, while quiet seasons must mean something has gone terribly wrong. Yet Scripture consistently points toward a different way of measuring life. It repeatedly reminds believers that God sees the hidden places of the heart, the quiet acts of faithfulness, and the perseverance that few other people ever notice. That does not erase loneliness overnight. It does, however, invite a different question. Instead of asking only, why am I being pulled away from others? Perhaps we can also ask, what kind of person is God shaping me into during this season? The answer may not come immediately. Waiting rarely feels comfortable. Yet asking the question keeps hope alive, without pretending to know every reason behind our circumstances. You may already notice subtle changes inside yourself. Perhaps you have become more compassionate because you know what exclusion feels like. Perhaps you notice lonely people more quickly because you understand their silence. Perhaps your prayers have become more honest than they ever were when life felt easy. These are quiet forms of growth that often happen before anyone else notices them. There is another possibility worth considering. Sometimes when familiar support fades, we become more aware of God's steady presence. Not because God enjoys our pain, but because difficult seasons can strip away illusions of self-sufficiency and remind us how deeply we need His grace. Many believers have looked back on lonely years and discovered that, while they would never wish to repeat them, those seasons became places where their trust matured in unexpected ways. That perspective does not require denying the pain. It simply refuses to let pain become the entire story. Your present experience may still feel confusing. You may still wake up tomorrow wishing certain relationships had turned out differently. Those feelings are real. Faith does not erase them. Instead, it offers the possibility that God can meet us within them, gradually bringing comfort, wisdom, and hope, even when every answer has not yet arrived. As you continue listening, consider reflecting on your own journey. Have there been moments that felt like endings, but later revealed unexpected growth? If this message connects with something you have been quietly carrying, share your experience in the comments. Someone else reading your words may discover they are not nearly as alone as they believed. For now, hold on to this simple thought. Feeling quietly pulled away from others does not automatically mean you have been forgotten. Sometimes it is simply evidence that your story is still unfolding, and that God may be at work in ways you cannot yet fully see. The questions remain, the loneliness is still real, and the road ahead may still feel uncertain. But hope often begins long before understanding does. The hardest part about seasons of quiet separation is that they rarely announce themselves. There is no moment when heaven explains exactly what is happening. There is no voice telling you that this uncomfortable chapter will eventually make sense. Instead, life simply keeps moving while your heart struggles to catch up. You continue going to work, attending church, answering messages, fulfilling responsibilities, yet somewhere beneath the routine, you carry the weight of wondering whether anyone truly notices the battle taking place inside you. You may even question your own faith during moments like these. You pray, but the silence feels long. You read scripture, but some days the words seem to pass through your eyes without immediately settling into your heart. Then guilt quietly arrives, whispering that if your faith were stronger, you would not feel this way. Yet the Bible never teaches that genuine faith eliminates every struggle. Again and again it shows ordinary people bringing their confusion before God instead of hiding it from Him. They cried, they questioned, they waited, they hoped. Their honesty did not drive God away. If anything, it became part of the relationship He was patiently forming with them. Think about how often we assume that closeness to God should always feel emotionally obvious. We expect every prayer to bring immediate peace, every decision to produce certainty, every season of obedience to result in visible blessings. But life often unfolds differently. Sometimes the greatest evidence of faith is continuing to trust God's character when your circumstances refuse to explain His timing. That kind of trust is rarely loud. It grows quietly, almost unnoticed, much like roots spreading beneath the surface long before anyone sees the tree becoming stronger. While everyone else measures visible progress, God may be nurturing something much deeper inside you. Endurance, humility, compassion, wisdom, patience, or a dependence upon Him that success alone could never have produced. You may remember a version of yourself that desperately wanted everyone's approval. A kind word could brighten your week, while one rejection could ruin it. Without realizing it, much of your identity depended upon how others responded to you. Then this season arrived. Suddenly the applause became quieter. Invitations became fewer. Certain relationships changed. At first it felt like loss. It may still feel that way today, yet there is another possibility worth reflecting upon. What if God is gently teaching you to build your identity upon something more stable than human acceptance? Human relationships are beautiful gifts, but they were never designed to carry the full weight of your identity. People change, circumstances change, expectations change. God's love, however, is presented throughout Scripture as faithful even when life feels uncertain. Learning to rest in that truth is rarely easy, but it can gradually free your heart from constantly chasing validation that no person can permanently provide. This does not mean withdrawing from people or pretending relationships no longer matter. Healthy community remains important. We were created for connection. The point is not that isolation itself is holy, rather, some seasons of reduced companionship can become opportunities to discover that God's presence is not limited by how many people currently understand you. Even when your circle becomes smaller, His faithfulness does not become smaller with it. Perhaps one reason this season hurts so deeply is because you expected your life to look different by now. Maybe you imagined having lifelong friends surrounding you, a family gathering around the dinner table, or a community where you felt completely known. Instead, your reality feels quieter than you planned. It is natural to grieve the difference between expectation and reality. Faith does not require pretending disappointment never happened. Even faithful people mourned dreams that unfolded differently than expected. Yet they also discovered that God was capable of bringing meaning into places they never would have chosen on their own. There is something remarkable that often happens during prolonged waiting. At first, you spend your energy asking when everything will change. Later, almost without noticing, you begin asking who you are becoming while you wait. That shift is significant. It does not remove the longing for companionship, but it transforms waiting from empty time into meaningful time. Instead of viewing every quiet day as evidence that life has stopped, you begin recognizing countless small opportunities for growth that previously escaped your attention. Maybe you become more attentive to people others overlook. Maybe you learn to listen more carefully because you know what it feels like to wish someone would truly hear you. Maybe your prayers become less focused upon changing every circumstance and more focused upon asking God to shape your heart within those circumstances. Those changes rarely appear dramatic from the outside, but they often become the foundation for a life marked by deeper character and steadier faith. If this season has taught you anything valuable, even through tears, consider sharing it in the comments. Someone reading your experience may find courage simply by realizing that hope can survive difficult seasons. Sometimes the testimony we need most is not from someone whose life has become perfect, but from someone who continues trusting God while still walking through unanswered questions. One of the quiet dangers of loneliness is that it slowly changes the stories we tell ourselves. We begin interpreting every unanswered message as rejection. Every cancelled plan becomes proof that we do not matter. Every period of silence convinces us we have somehow been forgotten. The human mind naturally searches for explanations, and when clear answers are missing, fear often fills the empty spaces. That is why it becomes so important to return again and again to what we know about God's character, rather than allowing fear alone to define reality. Scripture consistently portrays God as near to the brokenhearted, patient with those who wait, and faithful even when His timing remains mysterious. Those truths do not erase emotional pain overnight, but they provide solid ground beneath our feet when emotions threaten to convince us that hope has disappeared. Perhaps you are closer to a meaningful turning point than you realize, not because a dramatic event is guaranteed to happen tomorrow, but because something inside you has already begun changing. You are learning to endure without becoming bitter. You are learning to hope without demanding immediate answers. You are learning that your worth cannot be measured solely by who stays or who leaves. These lessons are rarely celebrated by the world, yet they are profoundly valuable. Character shaped through perseverance often becomes the quiet strength that carries a person through every future season, whether joyful or difficult. The truth is that being quietly pulled away from others may never feel pleasant while you are living through it. You may continue wishing certain relationships had unfolded differently, and that longing is understandable. But do not assume that the presence of grief means the absence of God. Throughout the biblical story, grief and hope often walked together. Tears and trust often existed side by side. Waiting and worship frequently shared the same heart. Perhaps your life is entering one of those sacred places where sorrow has not yet disappeared, yet hope has begun to grow beneath the surface. If that is where you are today, do not give up. Your story is still being written, and sometimes the chapters that seem the quietest become the ones that shape the deepest kind of faith. There may come a day when you look back on this season and realize that the greatest change was not that more people entered your life, but that you became someone who no longer needed constant reassurance to believe you were loved by God. Right now that may sound impossible because the ache is still real. You still notice the empty seat beside you. You still hesitate before sending a message because you wonder if anyone truly wants to hear from you. You still walk into certain places carrying the quiet fear that you will once again feel like an outsider. Those experiences leave marks on the heart, and pretending otherwise would not honor the reality of what you have lived through. Yet neither would it honor the faithfulness of God to conclude that your loneliness is the entire story. Throughout life, there are seasons we can only understand by looking backward. While we are living them, they seem like endless detours. Later, we recognize that they quietly redirected us toward people, places, and patterns of growth we never would have discovered had everything remained comfortable. That does not mean every painful event was sent by God, or that every broken relationship happened for one simple reason. Life is more complex than that. People make choices, circumstances change. We live in a world where disappointment is real. Even so, the biblical story consistently points toward a God who is able to bring redemption out of circumstances that seem beyond repair. That hope does not erase grief, but it refuses to let grief have the final word. Think about the person you were before this season began. Perhaps you measured success by how accepted you felt. Perhaps you feared disappointing everyone around you. Perhaps silence made you anxious because it forced you to face thoughts you had spent years avoiding. Then the quiet arrived, and with it came questions that could no longer be ignored. Who are you when no one is applauding? Who are you when your schedule becomes less crowded? Who are you when the opinions of others become quieter than the voice of your own heart? These questions are uncomfortable because they reach beneath appearances. They invite you to discover an identity rooted in something deeper than popularity or constant affirmation. Scripture repeatedly reminds us that our deepest identity is found not in how many people recognize us, but in belonging to God. That truth often moves from the mind to the heart, only through seasons when every other foundation feels uncertain. You may have noticed something unexpected during this journey. While some relationships became distant, your awareness of other people's pain increased. You began seeing the lonely person standing by themselves after the service at church. You noticed the co-worker who smiled all day, yet carried exhaustion in their eyes. You became more patient with those who seemed difficult, because you realized that hidden struggles often explain behavior we do not immediately understand. Suffering has a way of softening hearts that remain open to God. It can make us gentler instead of harder, more compassionate instead of more cynical. That transformation is quiet, and because it is quiet, the world rarely celebrates it. Heaven, however, values the formation of character far more than the appearance of success. There is also another kind of freedom growing inside you, even if it still feels small. You no longer chase every invitation simply because you are afraid of being alone. You no longer change who you are to fit every room you enter. You have begun learning that authenticity sometimes costs acceptance, yet it also creates space for relationships built upon honesty rather than performance. This lesson cannot be rushed. It develops one ordinary day at a time as God patiently teaches you that being known for who you truly are is far better than being admired for someone you pretend to be. Perhaps you have asked God countless times to remove this season. Maybe you pleaded for immediate answers, immediate friendships, immediate clarity. Those prayers came from a sincere heart, and there is nothing wrong with bringing such desires before Him. The Psalms are filled with honest cries from people who longed for relief. They remind us that God welcomes our honesty. At the same time, they also reveal that faith often matures not because every prayer is answered exactly when we hope, but because we gradually discover that God remains trustworthy even while we continue waiting. Trust is rarely formed in moments when everything makes sense. It grows through repeated decisions to believe that God's goodness is not measured solely by today's circumstances. If you are listening to this while wondering whether anyone truly sees your struggle, remember that you are not alone in asking those questions. Many faithful people have walked through seasons where God's work seemed hidden. They continued taking one step after another without seeing the entire path ahead. Their confidence rested not in knowing every detail of the future, but in believing that God could faithfully guide them through the next step. Perhaps that is all you need today as well. Not every answer, not complete certainty. Simply enough grace for today, enough hope for today, enough strength to take one more faithful step. If this message has reminded you that your season still has value, even when you cannot fully explain it, share that encouragement in the comments. Your words may become the reminder someone else desperately needed today. Sometimes God comforts people through the quiet testimony of another person who simply says, "I have been there, and I discovered that hope did not abandon me." As this chapter closes, hold on to one final reflection. Being quietly pulled away from others does not automatically mean you are moving away from love, purpose, or hope. Sometimes it is during the quiet that God gently loosens our grip on identities, expectations, and fears that could never carry us through the life He invites us to live. Sometimes the silence creates room for wisdom that constant noise would have drowned out. Sometimes fewer voices allow us to hear His invitation more clearly. None of this makes loneliness pleasant. None of it asks you to celebrate pain for its own sake. Instead, it invites you to believe that pain does not have to become meaningless. One day this season will no longer define every thought you have. Whether your circumstances change quickly or slowly, you can continue moving forward with the confidence that your life is not measured only by what you have lost. It is also shaped by what God is patiently cultivating within you. Perseverance when giving up seems easier, compassion born from understanding suffering, humility that remembers every difficult lesson, and hope that refuses to disappear simply because the road has become difficult. These qualities may never attract headlines, but they become the quiet strength of a faithful life. So when the familiar feeling returns, and you wonder once again why you seem to be quietly pulled away from others, resist the temptation to conclude that you have been forgotten. Instead, remember that your story is still unfolding. God has not promised that every mystery will immediately become clear, but He has consistently invited His people to trust His presence through every season. Your questions do not separate you from Him. Your tears do not disappoint Him. Your waiting does not escape His notice. Even here in this quiet place where so few people understand what your heart has been carrying, you are still seen. You are still loved. You are still invited to hope. And while you may not yet understand every reason for this season, you can move forward believing that no faithful step taken with God is ever wasted, and that even the quietest chapters of your life can become places where grace does its deepest work.